Welcome everybody. This is the Legal Beagle, if you want to call me that. This is about Fleming versus Ontario. Went all the way to the Supreme Court. So on the left side there you can see when the decisions were made and all the information there, judges. People involved in the case. And you can also scroll down to see if I can get my cursor. I don't know if you can see the cursor here. So right where that is, right about there, there's a webcast that you can check into, and there's case information there. You can see that. You can do your own research if you want. So I'm just bringing this up because that's what I do, is just to educate you, and you can follow up on it if you want. Bring you to places that you maybe wouldn't think of going before. So just follow here. You can find all sorts of information, and I'll also give you other links and other documents you can read if you like. So I'm just going to read along here and read the story together, I guess, and move on from there. So, Mr. Fleming was on his way to join a protest in Caledonia, Ontario in 2009. Of course, this is Canada, Ontario, the province of Ontario. So I'll just highlight this for you, and I'll just keep highlighting so you can see it probably better, right? Hope nothing happens where I lose it. There we go. We'll highlight that for now. So, Mr. Fleming was on his way to join a protest in Caledonia, Ontario in 2009. The protest was against the occupation of a piece of land by the First Nations group. That's, Indians. He was carrying a Canadian flag on a wooden pole and walking down a street beside the occupied land. So, police officers saw him as they drove by. There had been violence in the past, and they were planning to keep the groups apart. The officers turned their vehicles around and sped towards him. Sped towards him. That's a key word, sped towards him. Mr. Fleming got off the road and crossed a low fence for his safety. He said he did this to get away from the speeding vehicles and onto level ground. The officers were yelling. Mr. Fleming said he didn't think they were yelling at him because he hadn't done anything wrong. And sure, if you don't think you've done anything wrong, why would you suspect them to be yelling at you? The people occupying the land came toward him. They were the aggressors. They came toward him. When they were about 10 to 20 feet apart, the police told Mr. Fleming he was under arrest. He didn't do anything wrong. They ordered him to drop his flag. Why did they order him to drop his flag? Because they were afraid that it was going to be used as a weapon. And if you listen to the Supreme Court webcast, it's mentioned there that they're using that as a reason for, a flag. It can be used for a weapon. Meanwhile, police officers have tasers, guns, bats, bulletproof jackets, whatever, big heavy boots they can kick somebody with, and they're trained, right? Trained to fight, I think. Most of them, anyway. Anyway, they ordered him to drop his flag. He refused. Officers forced him to the ground, and that's the pictures you saw at the beginning of the show. They took his flag, handcuffed him for nothing. Mr. Fleming said he injured his arm Probably, the way I see it, and if you look at the pictures, you can see his force pinned right to the ground. The police officer took him to jail, let him go a few hours later, and the reason why they realized that he hadn't done anything wrong. And what are they going to do? They've arrested somebody unlawfully. He was charged with obstructing a police officer, preventing a police officer from doing their job. They approached him. They didn't do anything. He didn't do anything. They came after him, and the native people came after him. He went to a court. He went to a court a dozen times to fight the charge. He went to court, which was later dropped. He had to go a dozen times to get it dropped. Unbelievable. And this is an innocent man. In 2011, Mr. Fleming sued the province of Ontario, and the officers involved in his arrest. He said the officers acted wrongfully. He said they assaulted and battered him, wrongfully arrested him, and falsely imprisoned him, which, of course, happened. He also said they violated several of his rights under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, part of Canada's Constitution. So that's all true. If you follow the court transcripts, you'll see that it is all true. So I'm just going to scroll down here and continue. So in 2011, Mr. Fleming sued the province of Ontario and the officers involved in his arrest. He said that the officers acted wrongfully. He said they assaulted and battered him, wrongfully arrested him, and falsely imprisoned him. He also said they violated several of his rights under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, parts of Canada's Constitution. So, okay, so we covered that twice now. Police officers get their powers from statutes like the Criminal Code, common law, and law made by judges deciding cases, of course. They can only act within those laws. Under the common law, the police can limit someone's freedom, for example, arrest them, if it's reasonably necessary to carry out their duties. The police argued they had the power to arrest Mr. Fleming under the common law. They said it was to prevent a breach of peace. A breach of peace is more than a disturbance. It means there is a risk of violence and that someone will get hurt. The trial judge said that the police didn't have the power to arrest Mr. Fleming. She said he should be compensated because officers violated his rights, and the majority of the Court of Appeal disagreed. He said the police did have the power to arrest him. It said arresting him was necessary because officers thought there was going to be a breach of the peace. So I guess they can see the future. It did say there should be a new trial about whether the officers used too much force, though. Looking into the crystal ball, I guess. The Supreme Court unanimously said the officers didn't have the power to arrest Mr. Fleming. The police can't arrest someone acting lawfully because they think it will stop others from breaching the peace. They already have other powers to deal with these situations under the Criminal Code. So that's what the Supreme Court said. Since they had these less drastic options, arresting Mr. Fleming wasn't really necessary. Of course it wasn't necessary. Why would it be necessary? All he was doing was carrying a flag and walking down the road. He didn't do anything wrong. Anyway. Okay, so the court noted that preserving the peace, preventing crime, and protecting life and property are the main duties of police officers under the common law. They have the power to take actions to support these duties, even if these actions aren't specifically set out in the Criminal Code. Preventing breaches of the peace is obviously related to preserving the peace, preventing crime and protecting life and property. But the court said it wasn't reasonably necessary to arrest someone to prevent a breach of the peace if that person hadn't done or wasn't about to do anything wrong, which Mr. Fleming wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just walking down the road. Excuse me. Police are allowed to use as much force as reasonably necessary to carry out their duties. But in this case, they weren't allowed to arrest Mr. Fleming, so no amount of force was justified. So, there you go. They weren't allowed to arrest him because he wasn't doing anything wrong. He didn't break any laws. So the amount of force was not justified. Taking away someone's freedom, even temporarily, is serious. Of course it is. It's against the rights and freedoms. So often in situations like Mr. Fleming's, the person wouldn't have any way to challenge their arrest in court because there wouldn't be any charges. So that's the problem. They're not charged. The only option would be an expensive civil lawsuit. This was another reason the court said that the standards for judging police action should be strict. For sure. Should be strict. Okay, so that is it. That's the whole story right there. Now, I believe Mr. Fleming is deceased, but what they decided to do, instead of muting the case, they carried it through to the upper level court, which is the Supreme Court, because it's important, because it deals with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So they did make that decision, and it's excellent. So it's helpful because for people like auditors that are out there, people who protest, if you're not doing anything wrong, and the police come and they start harassing or doing something bad to you, stand your ground. Stand your ground. And state Fleming versus Ontario. Okay, everybody, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and stay tuned for a new law video. These are some accreditations and information for you if you want to do some research. The definition of breach the peace, resources, Supreme Court Canada. There's a website for podcasts. It's a website, and they have podcasts. You can listen to law on the channel there. And a breach of peace. That's an interesting story by STEPH Brown. It was pretty recent, March 1st, 2019. And the website and a law dictionary. You can look up peace bond. That's peace bond. It's not the breach of peace, but peace bond. I guess after you have been charged, not charged, sorry, can't be charged, but arrested. Yeah. Anyway, so if we desire respect for the law, we must first make the law respectable. And that goes for law enforcement. Anyway, take care, everybody. We'll talk to you later.